Hello. On Monday, the 16th of March 2020, around 50 London theatres and 250 other theatres around the UK went dark due to coronavirus lockdown restrictions. We are recording this 8 months after, in October 2020, and the majority of theatres still remain dark, at least to live theatre. However, the arts community is nothing if not resourceful, and there is some excellent theatre being delivered online and through Zoom. Budco's first foray into this area was to research lockdowns and virus outbreaks throughout the ages and to look at the literature, in particularly poetry, inspired by these times of mass illness and global pandemics. We called the series of films that resulted "A Plague on All Our Houses," a misquote from the famous phrase said by Mercutio as he meets his death in William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. We started in the 1600s, during the reign of Elizabeth I, Shakespeare's era. The British naval administrator Samuel Pepys famously kept a diary of the time, covering the period of 1660 to 1669. For Pepys and the inhabitants of London, there was no way of knowing whether the outbreak of the bubonic plague that occurred in the parish of St Giles, a poor area outside the city walls, in the late 1664s and early 1665s, would become an epidemic.
April 30th, 1665. Great fears of the sickness here in the city. Houses are already shut up and marked with a red cross upon the doors and "Lord have mercy upon us" writ there. Corpses being taken to their burial in the streets, the populace walking like people that had taken leave of the world, and mine own physician, dead. I have drawn up a will that I shall be in much better state of soul, I hope, if it should please the Lord to call me away this sickly time. The Bill of Mortality says 6,102 victims. I fear that the true number of the dead this week is near 10,000, with the poor uncounted. A most dreadful number. And people gathered at the Royal Exchange and other places and attending funerals despite official orders. Plague victims to be interred at night, being buried in broad daylight. Seeing shut-up houses puts me in an ill conception of myself and my smell, so that I am forced to buy some roll tobacco to smell and chew. A noble patroness gives me a bottle of plague water of various herbs, but the plague grows upon us in this town, and remedies are none. News of dead friends doth put me into great apprehensions of melancholy. And when I enter other towns, the townspeople are afeard of us that come to them, insomuch as that I am troubled by it. But I put off the thoughts of sadness as much as I can. I have refrained from wearing the wig I bought in an area of great plague, and there is fear that the wigs be made of the hair of plague victims. And though round about, and next door on every side is the plague, I visited my mistress. I did not value it, but there, I did what I could with her.
Then I looked and saw a pale horse. Its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed close behind. And they were given authority over a fourth of the earth, to kill by sword, by famine, by plague, and by the beasts of the earth. That quote from the Bible's book of Revelation prompted American writer Catherine Ann Porter to publish a book of 3 astonishing short novels in 1944. This included Pale Horse, Pale Rider. Set in 1918, this is the story of Miranda, a 24-year-old girl who contracts the Spanish flu. Throughout the world, Spanish flu has killed 500 million people, a third of the globe's population. In this passage, at the beginning of the story, Miranda dreams that she must choose one of her beloved family horses to outrun the pale horse and its rider's death.
In sleep, she knew she was in her bed, but not the bed she had laid down in a few hours since, and the room was not the same. But it was the room she had known somewhere. Her heart was a stone lying upon her breast, outside of her. Her pulse lagged and paused, and she knew that something strange was going to happen. Even as the early morning winds were cool through the lattice, the streaks of light were dark blue, and the whole house was snoring in its sleep. Now, I must get up and go while they are all asleep. Where are my boots? And what horse will I ride? Fiddler, or Grayley, or Miss Julie with the long nose and the wicked eye? And the stranger, there is that lac-green stranger I remember hanging about the place, welcomed by my grandfather, my great-aunt, my 5 times removed cousin, and my decrepit hound and my silver kitten. Why did they take to him, I wonder? And where are they now? Yet I saw him pass the window in the evening. What else besides them did I have in the world? Nothing. Nothing is mine. I have only nothing. But it is enough. It is beautiful and it is all mine. Now, what horse shall I borrow for this journey? I do not mean to take. Grayley or Miss Lucy or Fiddler, who can jump ditches in the dark and knows how to get the bit between his teeth. Early morning is the best time because trees are trees in one stroke. Stones are stones set in shades known to be grass. There are no false shapes or surmises. The road is still asleep with the crust of dew unbroken. I'll take Grayley because he is not afraid of bridges. Come now, Grayley, she said, taking his bridle. We must outrun death and the devil. You are no good for it, she told the other horses, standing saddled before the stable gate. Among them, the horse of the stranger, grey also, with tarnished nose and ears. The stranger swung into his saddle beside her, leaned forwards towards her and regarded her without meaning. The blank, still stare of mindlessness that makes no threats and can bide its time. She drew Grayley round sharply, urging him to run. He leaped the low rose hedge and the narrow ditch beyond, and the dust of the lane flew heavily under his beating hooves. The stranger rode beside her, lightly, easily, his reins loose in his half-closed hands. Straight and elegant in dark, shabby garments that flapped under his bones. His pale face smiled in an evil trance. He did not glance at her. Ah, I have seen this fellow before. I know this man. If I could place him. He is no stranger to me. She pulled Grayley up, rose up in her stirrups and shouted, I am not going with you this time. Ride on. Without pausing or turning his head, the stranger rode on. Grayley's ribs heaved under her. Her own ribs rose and fell. Oh, why am I so tired? I must wake up. Slowly, unwillingly, Miranda drew herself up inch by inch out of the pit of sleep, waiting in a daze for life to begin again.
HIV can destroy so many human cells that the body cannot fight infections, eventually leading to AIDS. In the 1980s and early 1990s, there were around 35 million deaths from AIDS globally, with particular devastation to gay communities. Though there is no cure for AIDS, a person who receives treatment early can live a full term of life. When told of our plans to record his poem in the waiting room, Baltimore-based US poet David Bergman said, "The poem records my participation in an actual research study at Johns Hopkins University. In the mid-80s, no one had seen AIDS in its early stages, and when I joined the program, researchers had not yet discovered HIV, the virus that causes the disease. I was one of 1,200 gay and bisexual men who went every 6 months to see if any of us had the disease. It was terrifying, but we felt that we owed it to the community to provide whatever information we could. Fortunately, I did not get AIDS, but 4 years ago I was diagnosed with Parkinson's, so I continued to spend time in the waiting room, although I know somewhat better what I am waiting for." The St. Gaudens referred to in this poem is a reference to the Irish-American sculptor Augustus St. Gaudens, who lived from 1848 to 1907.
St. Gaudens would have known what would suit this research institution. A tall, stately figure of science, proudly undeterred, her plain draperies hung in even rows to soften the cast of her bronze body. One hand aloft, holding a hypodermic needle. Before such images, these 6-month checkups would seem like a pilgrimage in which unpardonable clerics and unbathed wives had walked before me. But in this vast, unadorned building, there's no distraction from my purpose or the object for which I've journeyed. With only the pages of people and time for amusement, who would not feel afraid? For I am here as part of a study on the life cycle of the adult homosexual, to see which one of us will sicken next in our group of 1,200 odd from this strange disease of yet unknown beginnings that teaches the body how to portray the life within it. An endangered species. We are watched to see how it makes its first appearance and all the stages on which it acts in our theatre of operations. Sometimes 2 or 3 men are waiting to be called, not by name but number, to preserve our anonymity. So, who in the face of such cool clinical detachment could retain a sense of self? Yet at times one might see a friend or distant acquaintance head down or looking at the wall, there are no windows here, marking where the plaster has given way. I stop, exchange a few meaningless phrases, and perhaps he'll have a joke to tell or news of someone known in common, until the silence descends once more. And once, early for my appointment, I was left alone when voices shot through swinging doors. A man in a white laboratory coat and another clad in jeans were speaking. And I knew that the man in denim had become the person I feared that I might be. And I hated him for having brought his death so near that I could touch it. And the room seemed to fill with the dread odour of his dying, and I sat amazed. For with his neat beard and curly hair and the whiteness of his freckled face, he might be taken for my lover. Now the two were arguing in that complicitous tone of handymen faced with a machine that will not work. Well, what about this or that, they question, uncertain which, if any, repairs to undertake, running their cold hands along the ailing anatomy. I'll never live through that, the patient laughs, as though it were another's case he were discussing. I asked myself, can this be true? Can people withdraw so far from their existence that life and death become academic games left to pique their curiosity? A trivial pursuit that will not bore when played for hours at a time? Or is there some catharsis unknown to me when what you fear will happen, happens, and there's nothing more to fear? And one reaches that calm meadow where the sacred few are allowed to rest beyond the walls' polluted city that cast them out. They're gone away now, out of sight through another set of fire doors, but their voices still can be heard faintly, like a new spring, or the hushed tones of lovers careful not to wake the disapproving crowd. A nurse approaches, clipboard in hand. Have I brought my paraphernalia? Samples of semen and excrement which the study cannot do without. And the old terror revives in me of what they will find. The truth, perhaps, that I, like everyone else, will die. Bring him back. Bring him back, the one who gave me his healing touch. I'm ready to embrace him now, if he can stop the pain of losing what was never mine to keep. Bring him back, so that he can teach me how to be content when I take his place at last.
And so, we come right up to the present day. COVID-19 was first identified in December 2019 in Wuhan, China, and declared a pandemic by the World Health Organization in March 2020. Symptoms include fever, cough, fatigue, and shortness of breath. Complications can include pneumonia and acute respiratory distress. By August 2020, more than 20 million cases of COVID-19 have been reported in around 190 countries. The pandemic has resulted in around 740,000 deaths, and over 12 million have recovered. Jim Carruth was appointed the Poet Laureate of Glasgow in 2014. He has been described as Scotland's leading rural poet, an activist and farmers whose poems are moving testaments to a fragile way of life. His short poem, The Long Bench, illustrates Jim's connection to the natural world, mourns the absences caused by coronavirus, and looks to a more joyful future.
For the times ahead when we will be, as if at either end of the long bench, where distance kept is love's measure, and death dances the space between. When words alone are not enough, and cued memories reach out to touch. Let longing be a store of nut and seed that grows each day in strange hibernation, readying for its end, the sharing of the feast.
Racism may not be a virus, but it can be caught from parents, friends, and social media. And it is certainly a global pandemic. It seems appropriate to us at this time that we should add an extra poem to show our support to the Black Lives Matter movement. On July 17th in 2014, a black man named Eric Gardner died in New York City after police put him in a prohibited chokehold while arresting him. His last words were, "I can't breathe." Many other African Americans, most recently George Floyd, have said the same phrase prior to dying at the hands of the police. In fact, according to the New York Times, the phrase has been used by over 70 people who have died in police custody. Ross Gaye is an American poet and professor whose poem A Small Needful Fact relates to Eric Gardner's death. It notes that Eric's work included helping plants to grow to create oxygen so that we can breathe more easily. A small needful fact is that Eric Gardner worked for some time for the Parks and Recs Horticultural Department, which means, perhaps, that with his very large hands, perhaps, in all likelihood, he put gently into the earth some plants which, most likely, some of them, in all likelihood, continued to grow, continued to do what such plants do, like house and feed small and necessary creatures, like being pleasant to the touch and smell, like converting sunlight into food, like making it easier for us to breathe.